Hi, I'm David from Vivitar Photography, and today we're talking about portrait lenses. I'm only looking at two 85mm today. These just happen to be two that I have that for some reason I haven't reviewed them, so we'll dive into this really quick. So for a portrait lens, usually you want something a little bit more telephoto. For APS-C size, 55mm to 105mm. And for full frame, you want it somewhere between 85mm and 135mm. So in this case, we're going to look at 85mm today. And I'm going to look at two very cheap, fast lenses. That way you guys can get an idea of what you can do. Now, portrait lenses typically are ideal wide open. So we're going to look at the Vivitar Series 1 first. And this is a weird lens. It's so tiny. I mean, the actual physical size of this lens is only that big. Here's the lens without the lens hood. And this thing is crazy. It's just so small. And this is an aspherical design. What that means is that instead of being a perfect sphere this way to pull the light in and bring it down, it actually has a curvature like that to kind of bend the light in. And this allows for a very small design. And this is very small. By the way, this thing has some weird f-stops on it. So let me just show you this. It goes from f1.8, f2.5 to f3, f4.5. I mean, these are just some of the weirdest f-stops. f6, f10, and f22. There's nothing in between. So it's very strange. But let me tell you, I'm glad that they just stopped at f10, because really anything after f10 on this is just garbage. So don't even try to bring this thing down to f22. But let's take a couple of shots with it wide open and stop down just a little bit to see what it looks like. Alright, so we have this thing locked and loaded with an adapter. This is a Nikon mount. So, or Nikon. I never get that right. Anyway, this is a Nikon mount mounted onto the A7R via an adapter. And this one here is just a Velo adapter, but any adapter will work. You know, basic vodkas, it doesn't matter because this thing doesn't have any levers or anything in it. It's just a very basic Nikon F-mount. Nikon. Oh my God. Someday. Anyway, so today we're going to take some pictures of Happy Robot Baby again. I know this thing is just adorable, but I wanted to tell you guys something about this Happy Robot Baby. Alexis de Villiers, the artist that creates these, he was actually shown on PBS Art Beats locally, and then it got picked up by PBS Art Beats internationally, and it turns out that his spot on that show actually won an Emmy. So congratulations, Alexi, and the producer who did it, because I think that's just awesome. Anyway, let's play with this thing and see what it looks like. So typically, when you do portraits, you want to shoot wide open to give a very shallow depth of field to put the focus on the face of the person that you're shooting. How well does this do? Well, certain lenses do certain things. So let's check this out here. So we're going to shoot at f1.8. And let's go ahead and do this here. And these, of course, today are manual focus lenses. So we got to rely on peak focusing here. And it's very important if you're using a mirrorless camera, you have focus magnification that you can use along with peak focusing. I recommend both. Okay, so let's take a quick look at a Happy Robot Baby in detail. Now, this was shot all the way open, and we got excellent bokeh blur in the background. And on this side, we do have some chromatic aberrations that are kind of hard to fix, but when this is all the way open, this actually looks pretty legit, so I wouldn't complain too much about that. So right here, this is a little farther back and shot at an angle, and we've got the background daylight leaking in behind it. And again, this is at f1.8, so the quality of the bokeh blur is excellent, but as we start to look at the image, we see some heavy chromatic aberrations coming through as some blue and purple flaring. And this is pretty harsh, and it's so harsh that it's next to impossible to correct in this situation. But this is like at the extreme. You don't get this every time you use a lens. You just get this when you're shooting indoors with some daylight leaking through the back. The same image, and I tried to correct the chromatic aberrations on it just pulling it through the Photoshop RAW converter, and it didn't really do a very good job. So, you know, in certain situations, it does kind of suck wide open. Now let me show you another one of our model outdoors. Okay, so this was shot wide open at ISO 400 and with a 8x or 16x neutral density filter and a flash. And because we use the flash, it pretty much killed the chromatic aberrations. You see a little bit of purple flaring in her eyes, but that's it. Outside of that, all the edges and borders around here look pretty good. And again, the quality of the bokeh of the background is just buttery. I mean, it's in the right situations, this lens actually does an excellent job. And it's an aspherical design. And aspherical lenses typically reduce chromatic aberrations, but they do come at a cost of some barrel distortion. Now on this lens, because it's 85mm, I don't really see a lot of barrel distortion. This is the same model in a different outfit at f4, and if I zoom into the background, well actually let's take a look at her first. You can see zero chromatic aberrations. She's tack sharp, maybe even a little too sharp, and you know, overall you can see every thread on her clothing. Now this was shot at ISO 100 with an 8x neutral density filter with a flash. And so, you know, it gives a very clean image, no chromatic aberrations by the time you're down to f4. So really an excellent lens. But I wouldn't go past this point. It just starts to get weird, and f10 to f22 is absolutely unusable, and they're just funky f-stops anyway on this lens. I mean, it's really meant to be a portrait lens and nothing else. So let's go back to our robot here. Now, this is at f2.5, and as you can see, it's extremely sharp, but now we have no problems with chromatic aberrations. It's very clean, and the quality of the bokeh of the background is excellent. So yeah, you know, for a $120 lens, I would highly recommend this portrait lens. But you have to be careful of the environment that you're using it in. And just know that if you get into a situation where you see a lot of chromatic aberrations, pull out that flash and all that stuff goes away. Okay, so this lens actually, for what it is, doesn't do a bad job. Wide open, you have a lot of longitudinal chromatic aberrations haloing around your object, and they are very hard to correct. But if you step it down to f2.5, then it's not bad. This is a $120 lens, so you know, if you want something small for your camera bag, you don't do portraits very often, and you don't mind manual focusing, not a bad idea. Okay, so let's check out the next one. Okay, so we have the Rokinon 85mm t1.5 Cine DS UMC 2 lens, and this is the ASIF, which means nothing. This lens is actually for Sony E Mount, and no adapter needed to put it on the A7R or the a6000. But anyway, you take off the lens hood, and this is a fairly big lens. So just let me show you the difference. Here's the difference between the two, just to give you an idea in size. This thing is, you know, it's a decent size. This is also an spherical lens. So we'll give this a try on the A7R and see what that looks like. So we've got locked and loaded here, and let's go back to our happy little robot baby. And in this case, we're shooting this one wide open, and then we'll stop it down to f2.5, the same as the other one, and see how well it does. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at this. Now, this is the equivalent of f1.4 at t1.5. And, you know, the chromatic aberrations are a little harsh all the way open. But this, again, is because we've got a strong daylight background behind this actual image. The image overall is still very sharp, and the quality of the background of the bokeh blur is excellent. All right, so let's skip ahead here. Now, this is roughly at f2.5, and our background still looks excellent. Very soft bokeh blur, but look at our chromatic aberrations. Now they're starting to leave us again. And this is probably where I would recommend using this lens right here. And if I were to shoot this with a flash, believe me, those chromatic aberrations just wouldn't exist at all. I mean, this looks really good. So let's jump ahead to roughly, I think this is T5.5 or f5.6, f6, somewhere around there. And this lens doesn't have clickable stops, so it's really hard to gauge exactly where I was at. But here you can see that this image is extremely sharp. The detail is just excellent. And I did shoot this on a resolution chart last year, and it was somewhere around 3,600 lines of resolution on the A7R. So, you know, really way up there. I mean, at this point, you could put it up against the best 85mm you could possibly find, and it would hold its own. And it wouldn't look as good wide open, but it would definitely be hard to tell when it was stopped down. Okay, so here it is at the equivalent of f8, and our image is extremely sharp still. No problems with that. But what's happening is the lens flare in our background is starting to get kind of a harshness to it. And we're starting to get that really kind of harsh halo octagon effect with our lens flaring. So, you know, this is probably where I'd stop using this lens right here. Image quality is just excellent, but, you know, the background is just starting to get just a little stiff on us. Okay, so here's some real-world examples of what this lens is like. Now, a few weeks ago, there was a vintage go-kart race by my studio, and as you can see, these are perfectly sharp. There is a little bit of motion blur, but I did this intentionally, and these go-karts are actually only going about 15 miles an hour. So I'm sure that you guys are probably wondering how I got so much motion blur in this. And what I did is I used an 8x neutral density filter with the A7R at ISO 50 with a shutter speed of about 20, and caught these in motion as they were going by. And that really gave it a lot more motion than what was actually happening. But realistically, that's not what this lens was designed for. This is what this lens is designed for. So you have a focus knob that allows you to smoothly focus in and out. And in this case, we could also use the knob on the T-stops and be able to change T-stops from walking indoors to outdoors if we were following somebody using a gear method as well. But in this case, I just have it set up on the focus right now. So let's see what this looks like. Overall, this lens is very light. The image quality is excellent. I mean, everybody should own one of these, at least in the photography form, but if you do a lot of video, this is definitely the way to go. Now, using this for photography, I actually have a few issues with. This moves way too easily for me. I wish the T-stops were made clickable and unclickable, but that's okay. I mean, for the price, you can't beat it. Anyway, what makes this the DS lens? Well, we've got markings on that side and on this side. So it's a double-sided marked lens. Realistically, there is no difference between this one and the old one. There may be some coating benefits because it's the second generation, but I really don't think that they changed anything at all on it. But this does work as a portrait lens, but realistically, without the clicking, it makes it kind of tricky to use. What is the difference between a T-stop and an f-stop? Well, an f-stop is just a calculated light measurement of what the lens might do in perfect conditions if it had completely clear glass that had no diffractions or resistance or diffusion or anything like that. But all glass does to a point. This is the way lenses have been calculated since they were first designed. A lot of you guys know I'm not a huge fan of DxOMark, but one thing that they do is when they test current lenses, they measure the t-stop rating, the actual light transition. So you can go in and see if your f1.4 lens is actually bringing in 1.4 stops of light, because most of the time it's actually bringing in 2 stops. Why don't they use t-stops in photography? T-stops didn't actually come into play till 1948 when Bell & Howell made the first actual camera that had f2 t-stop lens on it, and that's when they decided light transition that was actually measured was a much better way to do it than f-stops. And if you think about it, you remember those old cameras, the video cameras that they used to use that had 6 to 8 lenses on a Gatling going around, and what they would do is they'd switch between focal lengths. Well, you can't do that with photography lenses because one f2 lens is not going to be the same as the next f2 lens at a different focal length. They're going to have a different light transition value. So realistically, that's why they got it. Now, as far as how well does this lens actually work, oh, this thing is great. It's extremely sharp, and it gets really good all the way down to about f8. Then it falls off at f11, really bad at f22. But realistically, this thing shoots solid wide open. Really, really awesome. Even better at f2. So, you know, I would highly recommend this lens. But unless you're really hooked on video, it's too easy to hit these and knock them out. So, you know, I'd recommend the clicky f-stop version instead if you're into photography. This one for video. So anyway, I hope you guys liked this quick little review. Give me a thumbs up, like the video, and we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.